Every now and again, you will find a location that is away from the rest of the world, a biome that does not interact with everything that is around it. When this happens, the diversity of the wildlife there can take on all sorts of unique roles and lifestyle changes, forming an isolated ecosystem. And a good example of that in this world are the lands of the Nassians. This isolated thick woodland is almost close to a jungle when compared to everything around it, and this allows for some very interesting interactions with the local dragons. See, like all of the wildlife there, the local dragons are unique to this land, and where you can still find a clade or two of a foreign genus, the stars of the show, and the kings of the forest by far, are the Vinedrakes. It is quite rare to find Vinedrakes outside of their natural habitat, and when they do leave, it is almost always out of desperation, and they will try to find something that is very similar to it. Something with large and abundant plant life, a forest, a wood, perhaps a jungle, maybe a swamp, for they have adapted to live with plant life perfectly. And in truth, they are actually in symbiosis with these plant life, and nowhere is that more clear in their anatomy and biology. So to start with the proverbial elephant in the room, the most obvious thing to note about them is that their outer layer is quite unlike most dragons, for it is not their scales, but in fact wood. As they get older, this wood becomes thicker and darker, and resembles a bark more than the natural layer of wood. Now, they do have a layer of scales underneath this layer of wood, and when they are younger, around the time that they are hatchlings, it might still be visible, as the layer of wood has yet to fully grow and overtake their bodies, but it's not unheard of that newborn hatchlings are fully wood. It is because of this outer layer that their patterns can change drastically depending on how and what type of wood has grown around them. It actually makes it quite hard to speculate on their, shall I say, natural biology, since the wood around it will in fact change the body. For example, horns will become irregular, as will their tails. Perhaps moss will start to grow in a few places. There are a lot of common trends that will change between each individual Vinedrake. Like most dragons of the land, they are classed as wyverns, given that they have one pair of legs and one pair of wings. Their wings are actually akin to leaves, in that they are made of the same cellular material. This even allows them to photosynthesize a little. It's not enough to sustain them, but it does make life a lot easier for them. They do not have to hunt anywhere near as much as most other dragons because of this, and if they remain still, they can probably go longer this way. And the last thing I'd like to note about their anatomy is that they get bigger over time. Well, everything does, but what I mean by that is that the wood does not stop growing, and when it does so, it makes more layers over the pre-existing wood. This is something that is a good way to tell a Vinedrake's age. The older Vinedrakes are just going to be much, much larger than the younger ones, for they have 2 or 3, maybe even more layers of wood around them. See, it is because of this that Vinedrakes tend to vary in size more so than any other type of dragon, and the younger ones are actually quite small. But most of them are actually quite large, bigger than blood chasers even, and just shy of a stone smout. But they would definitely lose to both of them in a fair fight. However, just like everything else that lives within the deep wood, they do not fight fair. See, unlike most dragons, they actually have an extra trick up their oaken sleeve in the form of a venom, or a poison, or maybe both, and sometimes neither. See, this really depends on the individual's clade, as they tend to adapt to what the local wildlife has. For an example, a Vinedrake that lives within an open glade where snakes can be quite common might have a venom akin to the snakes in that land, but one that lives in a swampy, wet area where poisonous toads are common might have an inner layer of wood be poisonous. Some even have quills that protrude from their back and or tail that they can shoot at their foes. It really does depend on where the clade lives. Just know as a general rule of thumb that the more bright and colourful the Vinedrake, the more lethal they tend to be in this regard. The more plain and neutral colours are usually safer and more tame than the others. Of course, I should mention the people that they are most famous for bonding with, and have a very interesting and unique relationship with. The Nassians. Of course, their forest is even named after them, and their bond is quite powerful and unique. It is what allows them to become fawn weavers. A hatchling and a child merge into one being. But I should note that most Vinedrakes, like most Nasians however, do not undergo this ritual, and merely return to the wild. But they still live near and in harmony with the Nasians. Some of them are even still ridden by them while not being bonded. That can happen quite commonly, actually. They are also commonly ridden by their nearest neighbour, the lands of the Valjordan, since the forest does extend all the way into their lands, and the Fawnweavers have an uneasy allowance for them, as long as they do not go too far into the lands. And occasionally a merchant might wander into the people allowed by the Nasians. They might buy a Vinedrake off them, although it's quite rare. But unlike the Nasians, some wild Vinedrakes do sometimes leave their forests for whatever reason, almost always ending up in places that are just like it in the terms of its lush and overgrown environments. And when this does happen, they often disturb the local ecosystem. When a Vinedrake is outside of their home, they commonly fight for dominance for the more indigenous genus of dragons. They very much are a top food chain type of dragon. You would expect them to fight the likes of the Night Snaggers more, but it's actually the Blood Chasers they tend to fight for dominance, since those Blood Chasers that do live in these more wild lands live at the top of trees, and Vinedrakes do not like them being there. Of course, since they rely on more underhanded tactics, the fight can really go either way, but I'd highly doubt they are going to be taking the Apex Predator title away anytime soon, since those Vinedrakes that do win tend to be alone, unlike the Blood Chasers. But there are always some exceptions to every rule, and some that stand above the others. Some would refer to these dragons as legendary, and there are just two I wish to discuss to convey a lot of interesting things about them. I shall start with a Fawnweaver, Orvandil the Overzealous. Before the Blooming Ritual, the Nasian counterpart called themselves Aureal, before they now share a name, and they were born all the way back at the start of the Age of Madness. They have defended their forest for longer than most can imagine, and have become one of the wisest elders in the High Council when it comes to the art of combat. See, during the Age of Madness, the Nasian people were invaded, and Orvandil near single-handedly held them off, impaling all invaders with a myriad of poisonous quills. Many view them as a war hero because of this, and they are the chief of the War Council. It has taken a few hundred years now for their age to truly show, but they still teach the new Fawnweavers how to do the art of battle, and I would not risk their wrath, for it is wise to fear the one who has grown old in a profession where men die young. Another legendary I wish to discuss is one that was not bonded, but remained wild. Thraid, the Wild Hermit, is one who struck out alone and left the forest when they were very young, and travelled to a very unconventional place for Vinedrakes. They went far south to the lands of snow and woodlands, and it is alone, where they are far away from any of their kind, that they stand their ground. It is there where he commonly dethrones and kills local dragons that threaten him. Those who by all accounts should be above him on the food chain are destroyed easily. Blood Chasers and Stone Snouts alike are bested, sometimes multiple ones at a time. He's even able to surprise attack Night Snaggers using their own tactics against them. He is one of those dragons who are just famed for their martial prowess alone. Townsfolk commonly take bets and guess on who he could beat in a fight, sometimes putting against other, more powerful dragons. Truly, the Vinedrake is a dragon that stands apart from the others, looking strange, but backing up its existence with raw, wild, and chaotic power. Their symbiosis with nature lets some people think that they are on the more peaceful side of nature, but in truth are just as capable of some of the more violent and wild acts when threatened, and sometimes maybe even when not. They can be some of the more peaceful and nature-loving dragons, of course, but they could also be so poisonous, to the point where being too close to them for a while will make you ill. See, if you travel within these lands a lot, you'll know exactly what I mean when I say this. Encountering a Vinedrake is a gamble. Some will leave you alone, or maybe even help you, wagging their oaken tail like a lost puppy. but some will pounce at you in seconds, venomous fangs bared for no real reason. Just follow the simple rule of thumb. The more vibrant and colourful the Vinedrake, the more you should stay away. Although that is not always a given, as there are exceptions to every rule, it is a hell of a lot safer than going in blind. Thank you for listening to my tales. I am the Ashspawn. Feel free to leave a like, comment, or subscribe. It would really mean a lot to me. But, till next we meet, fellow traveller, have a good day.